The call came at 11:47 p.m. Zuri's father stared at the screen, unmoving. Callan Rhodes. He hadn't seen that name flash across his phone in 2 years. And the last time they'd spoken, he told the man to never call this house again. But something in him said, "Don't ignore it this time." He picked up. "Mr. Kane." The voice on the other end didn't sound like the powerful billionaire who once dismissed his daughter in a Boston boardroom. It was cracked, unsteady, small. "I know I'm the last person you expected." There was no pitch, no smooth greeting, no pretense. Raymond Kane's grip tightened around the phone. "You calling this late better mean someone's hurt." The line went silent for 4 seconds. Then Callan whispered, "I'm the one hurt, sir, and I didn't know who else to call." He never apologized to her. He never fought for her. But the moment he called her father, he broke every silence he left behind. Have you ever watched someone pretend they didn't need you, only for them to reach out years later, when you finally moved on? Do you know what it feels like to carry the weight of an unspoken goodbye? Ever wondered what you'd say if the person who hurt you called someone you love instead of you? This isn't about second chances. This is about what happens when someone finally sees your worth. Too late. It's about the kind of love that doesn't end with a kiss, but with a quiet, broken voice on the phone, asking for nothing but a moment. If someone from your past called your parent in the middle of the night, would you want to know what they said? Would it matter anymore? Or would it stir up everything you buried? If you've ever been left without an apology or loved someone who waited too long to speak up, hit the like button, subscribe for more powerful true-to-life stories, and share this with someone who needs a reminder. Closure doesn't always come from the person. It comes from you. Let's begin. Zuri Kane stood in the lobby of the Rhodes Global Building, the kind of place designed to make people feel small. Marble floors, vaulted ceilings, a scent in the air that somehow smelled like power and money. She adjusted the soft cream shawl around her shoulders, brushing her fingers along the edge of the clutch she bought for this night. She hadn't told Callan she was flying in. He had been in meetings non-stop, barely picking up her calls. But it was his big night, a deal months in the making, now about to close. She wanted to be there for him. The receptionist looked up. "Miss Kane." "I'm here for Callan Rhodes. She hesitated. "A guest." A brief call was made upstairs. Then a man in a black suit escorted her to the 54th floor. When the elevator opened, it was like walking into another world. Glass walls revealed the Boston skyline glowing behind a large mahogany table. Everyone in suits. No noise but polite laughter and the faint cling of whiskey and crystal. And then she saw him. Callan Rhodes. Her Callan. Charcoal grey tailored suit. Collar open. No tie. Left hand in his pocket. Right hand raised, making a point about market projections. He always commanded a room, even when he didn't try. Zuri waited until he turned. He froze, only for a second. Then he smiled. Not the way he used to smile when she surprised him, but the kind of smile you offer a distant memory. She waited for him to come over. He didn't. Instead, he raised his glass, turned back to the men beside him, and said, "And that's when I told them, if they want the algorithm, they'll pay our number. Simple as that." Zuri stood there, blinking slowly. Someone bumped her shoulder. No greeting, no invitation to join. Callan didn't acknowledge her again. She took a slow step forward. Callan. He glanced back, half smile, then quiet. The man beside him chuckled. "Oh, who's this?" Zuri tilted her head slightly. Still calm. "I'm Zuri." Callan gave a light, dismissive laugh and said, "Let's not embarrass ourselves tonight, sweetheart. These are investors, not audience members." The air left the room. Zuri said nothing. One of the men looked away awkwardly. Another pretended to check his watch. Zuri's spine straightened. She nodded once, turned, walked past the gold elevator buttons, past the receptionist, down through the marble lobby, out into the cold night air of Boston. She didn't cry. She didn't run. She didn't yell. She just walked. Her suitcase sat untouched in the hotel room. A table was set for two by the window, with chocolate-covered strawberries. She had pre-ordered, and a bottle of the red wine he liked. She didn't stay long. The next morning, she wrote one sentence on hotel stationery. She took the train to his penthouse, let herself in with the key he hadn't remembered she still had, and left the note on the counter. "You don't get to shrink me." She folded it once. No envelope, no name. Then placed the key beside it and closed the door without a sound. Zuri sat on the Amtrak train the next morning, arms folded across her chest, her phone on airplane mode. She had nothing left to say, and if he was smart, he'd know not to chase her. Outside the window, the blur of winter trees passed like an old memory, too fast to hold, too quiet to stop. There was something cold about that train ride, not in the temperature, but in the way it stripped everything down. There was no luxury, no polished glass, no curated wine list, just a metal cart rolling past with bitter coffee and stale croissants, and space to think. A lot of space. She replayed the night before, not out of longing, but to memorize it correctly, so that years later, if she ever doubted herself, she'd remember every beat, every silence, every shoulder that turned away, every word he chose not to say. When she got off the train in Atlanta, her father was waiting at the platform. He didn't say much. He just opened the passenger door and waited as she slipped into the seat. They rode in silence until they reached her building. He parked, but didn't turn off the engine. "You good?" he asked finally. Zuri looked out the window. "No." "But I will be," he nodded. Didn't ask anything else. Didn't need to. That night, she unpacked slowly, folded her shawl with care, put her unopened perfume bottle on the bathroom shelf, the strawberries she had ordered in Boston. She never touched them. Let them rot. She wanted the smell to remind her. Next time she thought about surprising someone, she'd remember how much sweetness went uneaten. She returned to work quietly. Didn't tell anyone about Boston. Didn't take any time off. If anyone noticed the difference in her smile, they didn't ask. Zuri started closing her office door more often, even when she wasn't on a call. She needed the barrier. At night, she lit eucalyptus candles and journaled with music playing low. Not sad music, just music that let her feel the silence without filling it. She stopped wearing the silver bracelet Callan bought her after their first trip together. It stayed in a drawer with the rest of the jewelry he gave her. She never threw it away, but she never wore it again. 3 weeks after Boston, she got an email from his assistant. "Callan wanted to check on you. I hope you're okay. Let us know if you need anything." She deleted it without replying. 2 months later, another message. "I was out of line. I know. I hate how we left things. Can we talk?" No. She didn't need to re-enter a room where she wasn't seen the first time. She changed her number 6 months later, not because he kept calling. He didn't. But because she didn't want to flinch every time an unknown number came through. She wanted clean air, clear space, and to hear her own voice again, without his echo in it. Zuri wasn't bitter. She was better. She made peace with the fact that not all endings come with closure. Some come with silence. And silence, she learned, could be sacred. She let herself feel the sting without turning it into a story of self-blame. That night in Boston, it didn't define her. It freed her. Because once a woman sees herself clearly, she doesn't let anyone blur that vision again. Not even the man she once loved. Zuri Kane's mornings were sacred. Her phone stayed face down until 9. No news alerts. No notifications. No messages she didn't ask for. By 7:30 a.m., the kettle on her stove hissed quietly, signaling time for ginger and lemon tea. The windows remained open, even on cooler days, because the morning air reminded her she wasn't in Boston anymore. Atlanta moved at its own rhythm, not sleepy, but not cruel either. It didn't tower over her. It didn't try to change her shape. Her one-bedroom apartment sat in a quiet neighborhood tucked between a bookstore, a family-owned diner, and a community center that always had gospel playing low through cracked windows. This was her peace. The couch was hand-me-down but comfortable. Her books were organized by emotion, not title. Lavender by the sink, eucalyptus in the hallway, and on her nightstand, an old photo of her and her father, taken when she was still in law school. She had built something that made her proud. After Boston, Zuri left corporate law for good. She didn't make a dramatic announcement, didn't publish a blog post, just sent a quiet email to her firm, turned in her badge, and left the glass offices behind. She didn't walk away from ambition. She walked away from pain disguised as prestige. Now, she ran her own private coaching service for women trying to rebuild after marriages, careers, and identities that swallowed them. Her clients didn't care that she once had a powerful ex. They cared that she listened, that she didn't interrupt, that she knew when silence was more powerful than advice. Every week, she held space for women too tired to explain themselves. A surgeon who hadn't cried in 9 years. A stay-at-home mother with bruises that didn't show up on skin. A woman who once led congressional campaigns and now couldn't decide what to cook for dinner. Zuri didn't fix them. She reminded them they weren't broken. And slowly, they stood up taller. Her father visited every Saturday around 10 a.m. sharp. Same schedule, same knock. Raymond Kane was a man of structure, former Navy retired logistics manager, salt and pepper beard, pressed button-downs, and a quiet sense of humor. He never brought up Callan, not when Zuri's jaw clenched at the mention of Boston, not when finance news ran headlines about Rhodes Global tripling in valuation, not even when a Sunday magazine called Callan America's most private billionaire. Instead, he asked her if her plants were still alive. He teased her about forgetting to eat lunch. He brought her the same glazed donuts from the same bakery, only now he cut them in half so she wouldn't eat the whole thing and blame the sugar. Zuri appreciated that he didn't pry, but she knew he hadn't forgotten. The day she came home from Boston, she looked different. Not shattered, just done. He never asked what happened, but he knew, because fathers like him always knew. She had walked in with a quiet her shoulders didn't have before. That kind of silence only comes from someone you loved deeply and lost while they were still alive. Late at night, when the windows fogged and the candles burned low, Zuri sometimes took out the letter Callan once wrote her. It was creased from how often she'd unfolded it, even if she hadn't read it in months. Loving you felt like home. I just didn't know how to stay inside it. She never answered him, never sent a letter back. What could she say? You can't teach someone how to hold you when they think presence is weakness. Some Saturday mornings, Zuri and her father sat without saying much. The TV stayed off. They drank coffee. He read the newspaper. She journaled or answered emails. It was their way of being close, without needing to fill the air. One morning, as he passed her a half donut and sat back with his mug, he said casually, "You still don't talk about him." Zuri didn't look up from her tea. "I don't have anything new to say." He nodded slowly. "That mean you've said it all? Or that you're still saying it to yourself?" Zuri set the cup down and breathed in. "I'm still listening to my own voice." He didn't push. He just nodded again and changed the subject. That was love. Not always needing the answer, just giving space to feel safe enough for one. Later that afternoon, Zuri walked her neighborhood loop, the one that passed the same 3 dogs, the same wind chimes, the same mural with the phrase, "You are not lost just because you're quiet." Every time she saw that wall, something softened inside her. Because that's how she had rebuilt her life, quietly, without revenge, without rage. She didn't speak his name. She didn't need to. She still got emails from Boston contacts now and then, people asking for referrals, others trying to reconnect after seeing her name mentioned in an article about trauma coaching. She never answered those either. She had chosen peace, and peace didn't mean pretending Boston didn't happen. It meant not needing it to define her anymore. She no longer checked his social media or what little of it existed. She never Googled him, never asked mutual friends what he was up to, because if someone had to be chased to understand your worth, they were never holding you to begin with. One night, Zuri sat on her small balcony, the scent of sandalwood drifting from the living room. She watched as a neighbor across the street carried their sleepy toddler inside. It reminded her of something Callan once said when they were walking down Charles Street. "I think I'd be a good father, but I'd probably mess it up for a while before getting it right." She had laughed at the time, squeezed his hand, told him, "Just don't disappear." Now, 2 years later, he had. And the irony? She didn't miss him. She missed who she had been with him. The way she believed in their future. The way she held space for someone who didn't know how to stand still. But missing isn't the same as wanting them back. Have you ever rebuilt your life without needing closure? Ever chosen peace, even when you never got the apology? If this story touches a quiet part of your heart, like this video, drop a comment. And subscribe to Mr. Charles Stories for more emotional, true-to-life journeys. You're not alone in this kind of strength. Raymond Kane's alarm clock glowed in the dark. 11:47 p.m. He wasn't asleep. He rarely was these days. 2 years into retirement, and his body still rose like it had duties to perform. Some part of him remained wired to early hours and split-second decisions, left over from his Navy years. So when the phone buzzed on the nightstand, he didn't flinch, didn't scramble. He just turned toward the screen and stared. Callan Rhodes. The name blinked like it was testing him, daring him to remember what it had cost his daughter. Raymond's jaw tightened. He hadn't spoken to that man since the morning Zuri came home from Boston with a quiet he'd never seen in her before. He had hugged her, said nothing, and watched her go into her room, knowing something had shattered but not knowing the shape of it yet. And when she finally told him, with few words, no tears, he had made a silent vow. "Don't ever call her again. And don't call me either." But the phone kept buzzing. He let it ring once, twice, a third time. Then he pressed accept, not because he wanted to, but because of one thing. A man doesn't call another man's father at midnight unless something's wrong, deeply wrong. "Mr. Kane." Callan's voice was quiet, too quiet. There was no billionaire cadence, no pitch, no apology. No arrogance, just breath. And then, "I know I'm the last person you expected." Raymond sat up, his hand braced against his knee. The air in the room felt suddenly heavy. "You calling this late better mean someone's hurt," he said flatly. 4 full seconds passed, long enough for a man like Raymond to start preparing for the worst. Then Callan exhaled. "I'm the one hurt, sir." A pause. "And I didn't know who else to call." Raymond didn't respond right away. He leaned back slowly in the chair next to the bed and let those words settle. Not because they were poetic, because they were dangerous. What did this man want? Sympathy? Permission? Access? He kept his voice cold. "You didn't call her first." "No, sir. I wouldn't do that." "Why me?" "Because I knew you'd pick up. Even if you didn't want to." Raymond's eyes narrowed. "That doesn't answer the question." Callan sighed. It wasn't theatrical. It sounded tired, real. "I mailed you something a few weeks ago, a letter. I didn't know if you got it." "I got it," Raymond replied. "I wrote everything in there, but I figured you'd read it and toss it. And I wouldn't blame you." His voice cracked. I didn't know what else to do." Raymond closed his eyes briefly, remembering the envelope. Unmarked. No return address. He had opened it on a Sunday afternoon, read it once, and slid it into the top drawer of his desk without saying a word. He hadn't told Zuri. He hadn't wanted to stir the peace she worked so hard to build. "Are you dying?" Raymond asked, not to be cruel, but to be clear. There was no hesitation. "Yes." Silence. "I have a rare blood condition. Genetic. It's progressing fast. Not much public information about it. I didn't want anyone feeling sorry for me. And what do you want from me?" "Nothing." "You sure about that?" I wanted to say I'm sorry. To you, and to her." Raymond clenched his jaw. "You should have said that years ago." "I know. You humiliated my daughter. You made her shrink in a room she flew across the country to support you in." "I know that, too." "Then what the hell makes you think this matters now?" Callan didn't argue. He didn't deflect. He didn't try to twist guilt into grief. He just said quietly, "Because I'm not calling to make anything better. I'm calling because I didn't want to die without saying, she was the best part of my life, and I wasted it." Raymond let those words sit in the air. He didn't offer comfort, didn't acknowledge the pain. He wasn't ready for that. Not from this man. After a moment he said, "She's good now. Doesn't ask about you, doesn't look you up, doesn't need your words." "I figured as much," Callan said. "She shouldn't." Another pause. "I don't expect her to forgive me. I just thought maybe you could tell her I said what needed to be said." Raymond's hands curled over the armrest. "You don't get to rewrite the past." "I'm not trying to," Callan whispered. "I'm just trying to die right." The line went quiet. No click, no goodbye. Just quiet. Raymond stared at the phone in his hand long after the screen went black. He looked toward the closed door of the guest room down the hall, where Zuri sometimes stayed when she didn't feel like driving back to her apartment after dinner. She wasn't there tonight, and somehow he was glad for that, because he didn't know how to look her in the eye with that man's voice still ringing in his ear. At 6:30 a.m., the sky was just starting to shift from black to soft grey. Raymond walked into his study and opened the drawer. The envelope was still there. He pulled it out, unfolded the letter, and read it again. "Raymond, I know I'm the last person you want to hear from. I don't deserve your time or her forgiveness. But I'm writing this because I can't live another day pretending like I didn't destroy something sacred. Your daughter was never a shadow in my life. She was the light, and I dimmed her. I crushed her in a moment of selfishness I'll regret until the day I leave this earth. I don't expect redemption, but I do want to say thank you for raising a woman strong enough to walk away from a man like me. You did your job. I failed mine." Callan. Raymond folded it again, but this time he didn't put it away. He left it on his kitchen table. Then he picked up his keys and headed for Zuri's apartment. She deserved to know, even if she didn't want to. Zuri was already awake when the knock came. She always woke early. Her body didn't need alarms anymore. It simply knew when to rise. She was in the kitchen, stirring oatmeal, robe cinched tight around her waist, jazz playing low from her Bluetooth speaker. The knock came again, soft but firm. Only one person knocked like that. She opened the door and found her father standing there in a jacket, his eyes clear, serious. He was holding something in his hand. "Dad?" She stepped aside to let him in. He didn't say much, didn't sit, just walked in, placed the envelope on the counter, and leaned against the sink. "What's this?" she asked. "Something I should have given you a while ago." Zuri frowned and picked it up. It wasn't sealed. The edges were already worn. She slid the folded paper out and read the first line. Her breath caught. Raymond. Her father's name, not hers. Her eyes snapped up. "He wrote you?" Raymond nodded once. "A month ago. I didn't show you because I thought it didn't matter. But last night he called." Zuri's expression didn't change, but the pulse in her neck quickened. "He what?" He called. Around midnight. Her hand tightened around the letter. "What did he want? To tell me he's dying?" Zuri stood frozen. The only sound in the room was the quiet hum of the fridge and the soft echo of Ella Fitzgerald crooning from the speaker in the living room. She swallowed hard, still holding the letter but not looking at it anymore. "He's what?" He didn't go into detail, just said it's something genetic, it's moving fast. Zuri blinked slowly, like her brain was buffering the information. "And he called you," she repeated. "Yes." Said he didn't know who else to call. A bitter laugh escaped her throat. "Of course not. You were the closest thing he had to integrity." Her father didn't respond to that. Zuri finally set the letter down and crossed her arms. "What did he say? That he regrets it? That I was the one that got away?" Raymond's voice stayed even. "No. He said you were the best part of his life. That he didn't call to ask for anything. Just wanted you to know. I don't need to know. I thought the same, but you deserve the choice." She didn't respond. She stared at the letter again. She didn't want to touch it anymore. Didn't want it on her counter. It didn't belong in the life she had built without him. Raymond watched her in silence. I didn't say anything back to him, he added. No comfort, no approval. Just silence. Zuri met his eyes, and for a second, the strength behind hers trembled. She didn't want this. Not now. Not ever. But it was here, and it had a name. I don't know what he expects me to do with this, she whispered, barely audible. He doesn't expect anything, her father said. He said he didn't want redemption. He just didn't want to die with the weight of silence. Zuri turned away, walking to the sink, holding the edge like it could steady her. I already buried him in my head, she muttered. Now I have to do it again? Raymond stepped forward, put a hand on her back, didn't speak, didn't try to fix it, just stood there while she held her breath and let the wave of memory crash quietly against her ribs. Eventually she turned and leaned against the counter beside him. I'm not reaching out. I didn't say you should. She exhaled again. I don't want him thinking he still has space here. Raymond nodded slowly. Then don't let him. They stood like that a while longer. Two people bound by blood and silence. The kind that only shows up when past and present collide at the front door. Zuri finally looked down at the letter again. I'll read it later, she said. You don't have to. I will. Not now. Raymond touched her shoulder once, a father's quiet acknowledgement of strength. Then he left. No goodbye. Just a soft pull of the door, and she was alone again. Zuri sat on the floor of her living room later that afternoon, the letter untouched on the coffee table. She stared at it like it might speak without being read, and maybe it already had. The letter sat on the coffee table untouched for most of the day. Zuri moved around it. She cleaned, reorganized her bookshelf, took a long shower, opened the fridge 5 different times without taking anything out. But the envelope remained in the same spot, soft-edged, slightly wrinkled, and loud without making a sound. By nightfall, she gave in. She turned off the music, lit a single candle, sat cross-legged on the floor with a blanket over her shoulders. Then she unfolded it slowly. She read the first line twice. Raymond. She skipped down, scanning the familiar handwriting, tight and slightly, slanted, the way Callan always wrote when he was being careful. It was strange how a man who once made everything seem so sharp now filled a page with such softness. It unsettled her. She continued reading. I know I'm the last person you want to hear from. I don't deserve your time or her forgiveness, but I'm writing this because I can't live another day pretending like I didn't destroy something sacred. Your daughter was never a shadow in my life. She was the light. And I dimmed her. I crushed her in a moment of selfishness I'll regret until the day I leave this earth. I don't expect redemption, but I do want to say thank you for raising a woman strong enough to walk away from a man like me. You did your job. I failed mine. Callan. Zuri folded the letter again, pressed it flat on her knee. Her fingers shook, not from sadness but from restraint. She hadn't cried in years over him. She wasn't going to start now, but something in her shifted, not because of the apology, because of what he finally admitted. He knew. He always knew. She stood and walked to the kitchen sink, ran the water cold, and let it spill over her hands. It grounded her, gave her something to feel that wasn't the knot forming in her chest. She thought about that night in Boston, how he looked at her like she was inconvenient, how easily he laughed her off in front of people who didn't even know her name, how she had waited, just for a second, for him to realize what he'd done, but he hadn't, not then. He had looked away and kept speaking. And now? Now he was writing letters to her father. Now he was dying. Now he wanted to make peace, not with her, but through the man who had taught her how to be strong. She didn't feel flattered. She felt tired, because part of her always knew he'd come back like this, with regret, with the story rewritten in a softer light, with words meant to heal himself, not her. She went back to the living room and stared at the letter again. She didn't want to keep it, but she couldn't throw it away either. So she slid it into a drawer, not to revisit, but to mark it as finished. Done. She pulled the blanket closer and lay on the couch. Staring at the ceiling, she let herself feel something that wasn't anger or pride. It was sorrow. Not for him, for the version of herself that waited too long to be seen. For the woman who flew to Boston with hope in her heart and silence in her suitcase. And for the truth that sometimes arrives too late to mean anything. She stayed on the couch well past midnight. The candle on her table had long since melted down, leaving behind a pool of wax and the faint smell of burnt lavender. The letter sat in the drawer now, but its words had spread everywhere. Zuri couldn't sleep, not because she was grieving, but because a part of her, one she thought had gone quiet, was wide awake. She stared at the ceiling, arms crossed behind her head. The silence of her apartment no longer soothed her. Tonight, it asked questions, not the kind that needed answers, the kind that made you honest. What had she wanted back then? Was it for him to apologize? Was it for him to choose her in that room, in front of all those people, and say, "This is Zuri. She's not just someone. She's the one"? Or had she just wanted him to see her, not as an accessory, not as someone to manage, but as a partner, an equal? The truth was, Zuri didn't want Callan back. That door had closed 2 years ago. She had locked it with her own hands. But something about that letter had cracked the frame, because he didn't write it to her. He wrote it to her father. He had taken the most private wound of her life and handed it over to the one person who had watched her rebuild, brick by brick. And now, her father carried a piece of her pain that she had never wanted to share. She sat up slowly, pulled the blanket tighter, and reached for her journal. She hadn't written in weeks, but tonight felt like something worth capturing. She opened to a clean page and began writing in small, steady script. You don't get to call this redemption. You don't get to confess at midnight and expect the moon to stay out for you. You don't get to whisper your regrets into the ears of men you once looked through. I don't hate you, but I don't forgive you either. Not because I can't, but because forgiveness isn't currency, and you've spent all your credit here. I loved you. I loved you deeply. I loved you when it wasn't convenient to love me back, and I walked away not because I stopped, but because I started loving myself more. She paused, exhaled, closed the book. Somewhere between 2 and 3 a.m., Zuri stood barefoot at her balcony, looking out over the street. The city was quiet, save for the occasional passing car. She thought about what it meant to survive a kind of love that didn't see you clearly. She thought about how far she'd come, how much she had grown, not because of what Callan gave her, but because of what she refused to accept. By morning, she had already made peace with her decision. She wasn't going to respond, not directly, not ever. But she did send one short text to her father. You can tell him I heard the message. I'm praying for peace in his body. And in his heart. Raymond responded 10 minutes later. Message received. That's all he'll get. That's all he needs. Zuri didn't cry. She made breakfast, watered her plants, called a client to reschedule a session. The world kept turning. But for the first time in 2 years, she felt the story had a period. Not a comma, not a cliffhanger, just a quiet, firm ending. And the truth? She didn't need him to die to feel free. She had already buried what they had, long before his voice broke over the phone. And now, she wasn't angry. She wasn't even sad. She was steady, and sometimes that's all healing really looks like. Zuri hadn't planned to see him. She had no reason to expect it, no hint, no signal. But life has a way of folding unfinished pages into your lap when you least expect them. It was Nia's birthday dinner, a small group of close friends, the kind of gathering where heels clacked on hardwood floors and wine glasses kissed mid-laughter. Zuri arrived late, not because she intended to, but because she had taken her time getting ready. Soft bronze eyeshadow, matte lips, high-waisted trousers, sleeveless satin top, simple but intentional. She felt calm, capable. She wasn't dressing for attention. She was dressing in her own peace. When she stepped into the private back room of the restaurant, the low hum of conversation greeted her. Familiar faces, warm smiles, a chorus of "Hey girl" welcomed her in. She hugged Nia, handed over a small gift bag, and slid into her seat. She was mid-sip of sparkling water when her eyes drifted toward the bar. And then she froze. He was there, Callan, leaning against the bar, back partially turned, speaking to the bartender. His hair was longer. The once razor-sharp lines of his beard now grown out with a soft ruggedness. His suit fit the same, clean, dark, expensive. But his shoulders, they looked heavier. He didn't see her. Not yet. She blinked and turned away quickly, willing her breath to stay even. Across the table, Nia noticed. "You okay?" Zuri nodded slowly. "He's here." Nia's brows pulled. "Who?" Zuri tilted her head subtly toward the bar. Nia followed her gaze. Oh, it took her 2 seconds. Everyone in Zuri's circle knew the man who didn't deserve her. The man who vanished without screaming. Just silence and scars. "Do you want to leave?" Nia asked gently. Zuri shook her head. "No, not this time." The night continued around her. She kept her conversation light, laughed when expected, nodded when prompted. But a part of her tracked him in the room like a quiet pulse. He didn't look around. He seemed alone. No entourage, no loud energy. Just a man and his bourbon. An hour passed. As Zuri stood to excuse herself for the restroom, their eyes met, mid-step. He saw her and stopped breathing. She paused. He didn't move, didn't speak, just stood there like someone who'd been caught in a memory. She didn't flinch. Instead, she walked past him, graceful, quiet, unwavering. But as she reached the hallway near the back patio, a voice followed her. "Zuri." It was soft, strained, almost uncertain. She stopped. She turned around slowly. He was standing a few feet away, hands by his sides, eyes filled with something between regret and awe. 10 minutes, he said. "I won't ask for more." She hesitated, then gave a small nod. They stepped outside to the patio, dimly lit, empty, the night air warm with a breeze. She folded her arms loosely across her chest, her posture unreadable. He kept his distance. "I didn't expect to see you again," he said quietly. "I didn't plan to." He nodded, glanced down, then looked back up. "You look strong." "I am." Silence stretched between them. He didn't jump in with excuses, didn't launch into a speech. That, at least, was different. "I've been thinking about what I'd say if I ever saw you again," he said finally. But most of the words sound empty now. Zuri tilted her head. "So don't perform, just speak." He exhaled, rubbed his hand over the back of his neck. "I tried to replace what you gave me with power. But nothing feels real anymore. Nothing lands. I get awards, headlines, meetings with people who wear the right shoes and lie with the right, smile, and all I think about is how empty the room feels without someone who sees me." Zuri stayed quiet. "I made you feel small," he said, voice low. "And now, I've never felt smaller." She didn't soften. She didn't cry. Instead, she asked, "Why did you write to my father?" He swallowed. "Because I knew I didn't have the right to ask you directly. And I also knew he was the one who taught you how to be strong enough to walk away. I owed him that. I owed both of you something I never gave. Respect." She nodded once, slow, measured. "You're right. You didn't have the right. But you did it anyway." "I'm sorry," he said. "I'm sure you are." Silence again. He reached into his inner pocket and pulled out a worn photo. Held it between his fingers like something sacred. It was the picture from Tybee Island, her smile wide, his arm around her, sand on her shoulder, eyes full of tomorrow. "I look at this every day," he said softly, "not because I'm trying to hold on to you, but because it reminds me who I used to be when I had you." Zuri looked at the photo, then at him, and something in her shifted. Not love, not forgiveness, but closure. Zuri didn't reach for the photo. She didn't need to. She remembered that day. The sun had been too bright, her hair a mess from the wind, and Callan had laughed. When she insisted they take a picture before heading back to the cottage, she hadn't looked her best, but she had felt loved. Or so she thought. Now, the image only held memory, not meaning. She studied his face. It was still strong, still sharp around the jaw. But the eyes told a different story. She saw tiredness, a sadness that didn't beg for pity, just truth. He held the photo out, unsure. Zuri stepped forward, took it gently, looked at it once, then folded it in half. Callan flinched, but she wasn't trying to destroy anything. She was closing it. She tucked the folded photo into her purse, then looked up. "You were right," she said. Callan blinked. "About what?" "I don't need an apology. Not anymore. I don't need closure from you." I gave it to myself. She wasn't angry. She wasn't harsh. Her voice was smooth, steady. "I used to think love meant waiting for someone to finally understand me," she continued. "But love is being understood without begging for it." Callan's jaw flexed. "I didn't see you," he said quietly. "No," she replied. "You saw the parts that made you feel good, the ones that made you look strong. The rest, you ignored." He looked away, shame clear in the curve of his shoulders. Zuri stepped past him, then paused. "I'm glad you got to say what you needed to say. I heard it. I believe you mean it. But that doesn't mean we get to rewrite history." He nodded slowly. "I know." She turned fully to face him one last time. "I loved you. That part was real. But I will never love the version of me who stayed in a place where I had to earn being seen." The wind shifted, brushing a strand of hair across her cheek. She didn't fix it. Instead, she looked at him, not with longing, with clarity, and then, with the calm only a woman who has truly moved on can carry, she said, "Good night, Callan." She walked away. Not fast, not dramatic. Just done. Back inside, Nia gave her a look. Zuri nodded once. "I'm okay." They didn't need to talk about it, not tonight. She rejoined the table, laughed when someone shared a ridiculous dating story, raised her glass when the toast came, smiled without pretending. Because this wasn't her pretending to be over him. She was over him. Callan stayed outside long after she left. He stared at the sky like it might give him something. But there were no stars out that night, just clouds and quiet. And maybe that was what he needed to feel. Not punishment, but presence. Alone, with everything he'd lost, not because it vanished, but because he hadn't held it when it mattered. Zuri drove home with the windows half down, jazz on the radio, phone off. She got in, kicked off her heels, made a cup of tea, and sat on her balcony, not to think about him, but to thank herself for surviving a love that couldn't stay, for never chasing the apology, for choosing herself when it counted. Callan stepped inside his penthouse and locked the door behind him. Everything was still where he left it, the antique bar cart untouched, the floor-to-ceiling windows, reflecting a skyline he no longer admired, and the silence, which used to feel like control, now felt like consequence. He loosened his tie, dropped it on the back of the couch, and stood at the edge of his living room. He didn't turn on the lights. He didn't need them. The city lights outside were bright enough to show the outline of everything he built and everything he lost. He poured himself a glass of water. His hands shook, not because he was nervous, because he was tired, bone tired. He sat on the couch, elbows on his knees, the glass untouched in his hands, and finally let the quiet pull the truth out of him. He remembered the first time he saw her. Zuri. It wasn't at a party or through a warm introduction. It was on a sidewalk in Chicago, outside a law building, where she was arguing with someone over a parking ticket. Not angrily, just confidently, like she knew she was right and wasn't afraid to say it. He watched from across the street. He didn't approach her that day. But her voice stuck with him. And the next time he saw her, weeks later at a firm reception, he recognized her instantly. Zuri had a calm that didn't beg for attention. She walked into rooms like she already belonged and didn't care who noticed. He had never been drawn to that kind of woman before. But something about her, made him curious, then humbled, then completely undone, and he'd ruined it, all of it, because he didn't know how to share space, he only knew how to fill it. He built companies, he made impossible deals, he negotiated with ruthless men and walked out of rooms knowing he'd won. But he didn't know how to stay soft in front of someone who saw past the suit. He didn't know how to be vulnerable without feeling like he was losing power. Zuri didn't ask him to be perfect. She asked him to be present, and instead of showing up, he turned her into a background feature. That night in Boston, the boardroom, the joke, the look on her face when he dismissed her. He'd played that moment over in his head 1,000 times. The way her jaw tightened, the way she didn't cry or cause a scene, the way she simply left. He thought she'd come back, even after she left the note, even after she turned off her phone, even after he stopped seeing her name in his inbox. He thought she just needed time, but what she needed was something he never gave her, proof that she mattered more than his ego. He didn't date much after that. Not seriously. There were women, even good ones, but they all reminded him of how incomplete he felt, and none of them looked at him the way Zuri had, like she saw the boy behind the billion. He didn't deserve that look again, not now, not ever. When the diagnosis came, he didn't cry, didn't panic, didn't call anyone. He just sat there in the doctor's office, nodded, and thanked the man for being honest. It didn't feel like tragedy. It felt like balance. The same way he'd treated people like tools. Now his body was treating him the same. His health was slipping slowly, quietly, and there wasn't a deal he could make to fix it. Writing to Raymond wasn't about strategy. It was survival. It was the only thing he could think of that didn't feel like begging. He couldn't call Zuri directly. He didn't have the right. But her father, that man knew what it meant to protect someone, to raise someone with backbone and grace. Callan figured, if there was one man in the world who could hear him without pity, it was him. He didn't expect to be forgiven. He just didn't want to leave the world without putting something back in the space he hollowed out. Seeing Zuri tonight, it hurt, but not because she was cold, because she was whole. She looked like a woman who had healed without ceremony, who had built a life without needing noise, and that, more than her silence, was what made his chest ache, because she no longer looked like a woman recovering. She looked like a woman free. Callan stood up and walked to the window. He looked out over Boston like it wasn't his anymore, and maybe it wasn't. Maybe it never really was. He pressed his palm to the cold glass and whispered, "You make me softer in places I thought were steel." The words never reached anyone, but they didn't have to. He wasn't saying it for her this time. He was saying it for himself, because some words, the real ones, only have meaning when there's no audience left. Zuri woke to the scent of sunlight, not coffee, not food, just that soft brightness that comes when the morning isn't rushed, when peace settles before the noise of the world starts knocking. She stayed in bed for a few minutes, eyes open, one arm draped across her waist, the other curled under her head. She wasn't thinking about Callan. She was thinking about how still she felt, how the wind in her chest had finally quieted. No turbulence, no questions. Last night hadn't cracked her. It clarified her. After a shower and a slow breakfast, Zuri sat at her desk, the one near the window, with a view of nothing grand, just trees and rooftops and power lines. It was her favorite spot. She opened a blank page in her notebook and stared at it for a long time, then began to write. To the version of me who waited in silence. You were not weak. You were patient. You believed love meant staying through discomfort. You believed presence would be enough. And when it wasn't, you didn't shatter. You left. You left with your dignity wrapped in both hands. You left with no screaming, no begging, no spectacle. You just left. And that was brave. I'm proud of you. She paused, closed the notebook. That was enough for today. Maybe enough for the whole month. It wasn't a letter to Callan. It wasn't a message she planned to send or read aloud. It was hers, and in some strange way, that made it more powerful than anything he could have said. That afternoon, Zuri returned to work. She met with a new client, A woman in her late 40s, soft-spoken but intelligent, sharp around the edges with tired eyes. The woman sat down and said, "I don't know where to begin." Zuri smiled softly and replied, "You don't need a polished beginning. You're not performing. You're just remembering." The woman blinked fast, then nodded. Zuri sat forward slightly and said, "Start with the part that hurts the least. We'll get to the rest when you're ready." It came out of her naturally, but the weight of her own words hit differently now, because she knew deeply what it meant to remember without collapsing. After work, she stopped by the small bookstore next to her apartment. The owner waved. Zuri browsed the poetry section, picked up a collection by a new author, and smiled at the dedication page. To the people who outgrew what hurt them. She bought the book without flipping further. Some messages don't need more than one sentence. That night, her father called. No agenda. "Just checking in," he said. Zuri smiled. "I'm good." Raymond paused. "You sure?" She looked around her space, the stillness, the plants, the unsaid peace. "I'm sure," she replied. There was no long discussion, just the sound of mutual respect resting between father and daughter. Before bed, she pulled the Tybee Island photo from her purse. It had been folded for days now. She smoothed it out on her nightstand and studied it for a long time. She didn't feel angry, didn't feel sad, didn't feel pulled back into what once was. She just honored it for what it taught her, for who she became after. Then, gently, she placed it in the back of her journal, not as a wound, as a record, a chapter that didn't break her, just shaped her. Zuri fell asleep early that night. No journal, no candles, no echo of past voices, just sleep, real, deep, uninterrupted, because the most powerful apology she'd ever received was the life she built without waiting for one. Have you ever healed without the apology? Have you ever looked back and realized the version of yourself who walked away was the strongest part of your story? If this moment resonates with you, like this video, drop a comment below with the word peace, and subscribe to Mr. Charles Stories for more quiet strength, real closure, and true-to-life storytelling that speaks to the part of you no one applauded, but should have. Because some of the most powerful goodbyes don't need words. Zuri didn't notice the seasons shifting until the hydrangeas outside her window bloomed blue again. Spring in Atlanta had a way of slipping in without announcement. The air grew gentler, the breeze felt like a second skin, and everywhere something seemed to be waking up, except her memories of Callan. Those stayed where she left them, folded, filed, finished. 3 months had passed since their last conversation. No calls, no texts, no more late-night mentions from her father. Callan hadn't reached out again, and that, too, was closure. The silence wasn't cruel this time. It was earned. She had said everything that needed saying with her walk away, and he had received it, accepted it, faded back into the space he once filled but no longer owned. Zuri's life didn't change dramatically. There were no grand career shifts, no romantic twists, just steady, meaningful days. But one email did stand out. A message from a women's leadership retreat coordinator named Lanice Ward. Zuri had spoken at a small event 2 years ago, and someone in that audience had remembered her. They invited her to speak again, this time in Asheville, North Carolina. Not as a lawyer, not as a survivor, as a woman who knew how to stand still and speak softly and still command a room. She said yes. The retreat was held in a quiet lodge surrounded by evergreens and walking trails. There were no stage lights, no press, no buzzwords, just a circle of women, writers, teachers, business owners, non-profit founders, gathered in an open-air room with nothing but wind and memory at their backs. Zuri sat on a wooden stool, microphone resting loosely in her hand, and began. "I'm not here to talk about heartbreak. I'm here to talk about the version of you that shows up after heartbreak doesn't get the last word." Heads nodded, eyes softened. Nobody checked their phones. We don't talk enough about women who leave quietly, women who walk away with no drama, just resolve, women who don't burn the bridge, don't call back, don't scream in the rain. Just go and rebuild. We call it strength, but sometimes it's just breath. It's choosing not to fight to be seen by someone who only knows how to look at mirrors. She didn't mention Callan's name. She didn't need to. The women in that room knew that story. In their own way, they had lived it too. When Zuri finished, no one clapped right away. They just sat with it, felt it. And that silence? It was the loudest kind of respect. Later that evening, a woman in her 50s approached her quietly. "I left a man like that last year," she said. "My daughter still asks why I never told anyone, why I never made a scene." Zuri touched her arm gently. "You didn't have to. You're here. That's the proof." The woman smiled with a kind of relief that made Zuri's chest warm. Not pride, not ego, purpose. Back at her room that night, Zuri opened her journal. She didn't write a lot, just a few words. The quiet ones aren't weak. They're just finished explaining themselves. She closed the book, turned off the lamp, and slept deeply. 2 weeks had passed since Zuri spoke at the retreat in Asheville. She'd returned home to a flurry of appreciation messages, small floral gifts, and quiet testimonials from women who'd heard their own stories in her words. But none of it compared to the stillness she felt inside. Not pride, not relief, just a deep, unwavering calm. And then the envelope came. It arrived on a Wednesday, unmarked, no logo, just her name, written neatly in black ink. She opened it casually at first, assuming it was a thank you card or perhaps a note from one of the retreat attendees. But then her eyes landed on the letterhead, Rhodes Legal and Family Affairs. Zuri blinked, sat down slowly. She unfolded the letter, hands steady but breath shallow. "Miss Kane, we are contacting you on behalf of Mr. Callan Rhodes. He has requested that we reach out with his express wishes regarding a personal matter. Mr. Rhodes has recently completed an amended version of his personal will. While he is still receiving medical care, he has asked us to inform you of the following. He has allocated a private fund in your name, titled the Zuri Foundation, to support women recovering from emotional abuse, career-related trauma, and social invisibility. You are not obligated to manage, oversee, or engage with the foundation in any way. However, per his request, we are extending this information directly and privately to you. You may choose to accept or decline all involvement. A copy of the final statement of purpose is included. With care, Devon Reyes, Legal Director, Rhodes Private Counsel." Zuri read it 3 times, then laid it flat on the table. She didn't cry. She didn't react. She just sat. She wasn't sure what she felt. It wasn't anger. It wasn't closure. It was something more complicated. Because this was him trying to give her something, not her back, not them back, but something he hoped might matter to the woman he'd once silenced. She reached for the enclosed statement of purpose. It was short, to give breath and room to women who were never allowed to take up space. To honor the one who taught me how to watch someone walk away, and never stop respecting them for it. No name on a building, no plaque, just legacy in motion. If she wants it. Zuri leaned back in her chair, eyes closed. She sat in silence for 15 minutes. Then she got up, made tea, and watched the steam rise like it might tell her what to do. That night, she called her father. After explaining what arrived, she asked one question. "Do you think this is guilt?" There was a pause. Then, yes, but not only guilt. Zuri waited. "I think it's regret," he said. "And maybe an apology. He knew you wouldn't let him speak directly anymore." She nodded slowly. Raymond added, "You don't have to carry it, but if you want to use it, make sure it's yours, not his." Zuri didn't answer the letter that night. She let it sit. She needed to feel what was hers and what wasn't. The next morning, she made her decision. Not from pity, not from sentiment, from clarity. She wasn't going to let her name be used like a trophy, but she would accept the foundation on her own terms. She wrote back, "To Mr. Reyes, you may proceed with the foundation. Under the condition that the board is women-led, the mission statement remains unchanged, and no photos or names of the donor are ever made public. This is not a favor. This is a rerouted apology. Let it serve. Zuri Kane. She folded the letter, signed it in clean script, and scanned a copy before mailing it back. Then she stood by her window, mug in hand, eyes forward. Some debts don't get repaid, some wounds don't get reversed, but sometimes something useful grows in the space where pain once lived. The email came late in the afternoon. Subject: Callan Rhodes. Health update. It wasn't from a lawyer this time. It wasn't official. It came from his personal nurse, a woman named Lainey, who Zuri had never met, but whose name carried a weight she couldn't ignore now. Miss Kane, I'm reaching out because Mr. Rhodes requested you be informed of his current status. His condition has progressed more quickly than expected. He's no longer mobile and has opted out of aggressive treatment. He asked me not to ask you for anything. No visits, no calls. He simply said, if she wants to know, I want her to know. But don't make her carry me. There is no action required on your part. I just wanted to honor his last personal request. Respectfully, Lainey Dumas. Zuri read the message 3 times. Her hands were steady. Her chest was not. She sat back in her chair, looked out the window, and watched as a man across the street watered his plants. The world didn't know that someone was preparing to leave it, and it wouldn't stop when he did. She didn't cry. She didn't panic, but a deep ache opened in her chest like a quiet door left unlatched. There was no drama, no romantic rush of grief, just stillness, and one long inhale she didn't release for a full 10 seconds. Her phone buzzed. It was her father. He didn't know about the email, but somehow he always called when something shifted. She answered, voice low. I got an update. Raymond didn't ask from who. He was quiet for a few seconds, then said, you don't have to go, Zuri. I know, but if you do, don't go for him, go for you. That night, she sat on the floor of her living room and lit a single candle. No wine, no music, no journal, just her, the flicker of flame, and the decision. Was there anything she needed to say? Anything she hadn't already made peace with? She thought of that photo from Tybee Island. The letter, the folded regret, the foundation. She thought about how he'd finally stopped trying to fix what couldn't be fixed. How he hadn't asked to see her again, only made space if she wanted it. By sunrise, her decision was clear. She would go, not to forgive, not to relive, just to witness, and to leave on her terms. Again. 2 days later, she was on a flight to Boston. Window seat, no checked luggage, hair pulled back, simple makeup, clean-lined navy blouse and dark jeans. No emotion on display, but every breath intentional. She arrived quietly at the facility, a private care home nestled just outside the city. No media, no marble, just quiet grey walls, a soft garden and sliding glass doors. Lainey met her in the hallway. She was younger than Zuri expected, soft-spoken, polite. He's awake today, she said gently, lucid, not speaking much. But he knows. Zuri nodded, didn't ask for details, didn't ask how bad it was. She didn't want to prepare. She just wanted the truth as it came. Lainey led her to a quiet corner room. Neutral walls. Books stacked on a windowsill. No monitors, no machines. Just sunlight filtering through sheer curtains and the sound of slow, even breathing. Callan was in a recliner near the window. He looked smaller. Not thinner, smaller. Like life had peeled him back to his barest self. No designer suit, no watch, no steel in his jaw. Just a blanket over his legs and a body slowly fading. He turned his head when he sensed movement. Their eyes met, and in that moment, nothing else moved. Zuri didn't speak first. She walked in slowly, set her bag down, and sat in the chair beside him. Close, but not too close. Callan's lips parted, but no sound came. He didn't try again. Instead, he smiled, barely. Not to win her, not to soften her, just to say thank you. She nodded once. Her gaze didn't waver. They sat like that for what felt like hours. No words, no reaching, only presence. Eventually, she reached into her purse, pulled out the photo, unfolded it, held it up. "Remember this?" she asked. His lips moved. A whisper. "Tybee." She smiled, faintly, then placed the photo on the side table beside his chair. "That's for you," she said. A tear slid from the corner of his eye. He didn't wipe it. She didn't point it out. "I'm not here to reopen anything," Zuri said softly. "I'm here because you made space for me, and I know what that cost you." Callan blinked slowly. "I didn't come to forgive you," she added. "I did that already." His hand twitched slightly against the blanket. She reached over, rested her fingers gently on top of his. Not for comfort, for closure. "I'm going to leave soon," she whispered. "But I wanted you to know something." He looked at her, breath shallow but steady. "You taught me what I'll never accept again, and I'm grateful for that." She stood slowly, kept her hand on his for one more moment, then let go. As she turned to leave, Callan mouthed one last thing. She paused, leaned in. His voice was barely a whisper. "Thank you for not letting me ruin you." Her throat tightened, but she didn't cry. She touched his shoulder once, gently, then walked out the door, and didn't look back. Zuri returned to Atlanta on a Thursday. The skies were clear. Traffic was light, and her luggage felt lighter than when she left, though she hadn't removed a thing. Her father picked her up from the airport. He didn't ask how it went. He didn't speak much at all. But when he parked in front of her apartment, he put the car in park, looked at her for a beat longer than usual, and said, "You okay?" She nodded. Raymond gave a short, satisfied breath and said, "All right then," drove off. No drama, no story needed, just respect. Inside her apartment, Zuri placed her small travel bag by the door and walked straight to her balcony. She stood for a moment, eyes closed, arms resting on the railing, and let the warm Georgia air settle over her skin. Everything in her life, every thread that once hung loose, felt stitched now. No one had sewn it for her. No magic moment did the work. It had happened quietly, over time, through silence, through choices, through not going back. The next morning, she got up early and brewed tea. She played no music, just listened to her own steps across the hardwood floor. Then she opened her journal. A fresh page. "I'm not carrying you anymore. Not in memory, not in fantasy, not in what if. You are behind me, and I'm walking forward, not away from you, but toward myself." She closed the notebook, then pulled out the Tybee Island photo. She looked at it one last time, not with bitterness, not with longing, but with gratitude, because in that picture was proof of love. Even if it didn't last, even if it didn't stay soft, it had existed, and now it had ended. She placed the photo in a slim wooden box and tucked it in the back of her closet. Not hidden, just no longer needed. Later that week, she went to the community garden near her apartment. There was a patch of soil she'd claimed 3 seasons ago but hadn't planted in since winter. She knelt down, gloved her hands, and turned the soil over. No phone, no earbuds, just birds, distant laughter, and wind. She planted rosemary, not because it was symbolic, but because it smelled like calm, like fresh starts. As she watered the new growth, a young girl passed by with her grandmother and said, "That's pretty. What is it?" Zuri smiled. "Something that grows back stronger every year." That evening she received a package, no label. Just a small box with her name. Inside, a hardcover copy of The Measure of a Life Is What It Leaves Behind. She already had a copy, but this one was different. A note was tucked inside. Short, handwritten, familiar. No return address, no reply expected. "Thank you for showing me the difference between love and presence. See." She folded the note. Didn't cry, didn't reread it. She placed it in the same box as the photo. tied a string around it, and returned to her tea. She sat by the window that night as the sun dipped behind the buildings. No thoughts of what could have been, only one clear truth. She came through it. Whole, quiet, powerful. Zuri stood on the small stage, holding a clipboard in one hand and a calm expression in the other. The event wasn't big. No press, no velvet ropes, just folding chairs, coffee in paper cups, and a microphone taped to a wooden podium. But this meant everything. It was the first official meeting of the foundation she never planned to carry, the Zuri Foundation, funded by a man she no longer loved, but built for women who would never need to be saved to be seen. The board was entirely women-led, diverse, sharp, grounded. Zuri wasn't the CEO, wasn't even the face. She had requested to serve only in an advisory capacity, quiet, off to the side. But today, they'd asked her to speak, not as a figurehead. As the reason the doors had opened, she looked across the room. There were 20 women seated, some in business suits, others in hoodies, some quiet, some smiling nervously. And in all of them, she saw pieces of herself. Not the woman she was now, the woman she used to be. The one who had sat at a dinner table full of men and still felt invisible. The one who had learned how to shrink for someone else's comfort. The one who once walked away without closure and still managed to breathe again. Zuri stepped up to the podium. She didn't bring a speech, just truth. We often talk about survival like it's the goal, but survival is just the middle. What matters more, what changes us, is what we do after we stop just surviving. I know what it feels like to carry something silently, to lose yourself slowly in a place that once felt like love, to shrink in the presence of someone who only values the version of you that doesn't take up too much space. But I also know what it feels like to take your life back in pieces, to build peace without applause, to speak even if your voice shakes, to leave before someone gives you permission. This foundation isn't about me. It's about every woman who has outgrown the rooms that once made her feel small. She paused, breathed, looked up again. We're not here to teach you how to fight louder. We're here to remind you that you don't have to prove anything to be worthy of rest, respect, and joy. There was no thunderous applause. Just silence, the kind that only shows up when people are thinking, I've been waiting to hear this. And then the room rose, quietly together, into a standing ovation that didn't roar, but wrapped around her like understanding. Afterward, Zuri sat alone in a small side room, sipping tea and watching as women filtered in and out of the space, talking, hugging, healing. She didn't need to be seen. She just needed to know it was working. One of the board members stopped by, a younger woman, mid-20s, bold lipstick, notebook full of color-coded tabs. You said something that stayed with me, she said. Zuri looked up. What was it? That survival is the middle. The woman smiled. I think I'm finally ready for the next part. Zuri smiled softly. You already started. As the room cleared, Zuri walked outside, heels clicking gently on the sidewalk, sun slipping low behind the trees. She didn't check her phone. She didn't rush. She just walked. Alive. Whole. Forward. The foundation's launch event had ended, but something inside Zuri hadn't. Not tension, not fear, just a gentle hum, like something soft was echoing, asking to be acknowledged before it faded forever. 2 days later, she felt it again, after breakfast, as she was folding laundry with music playing low. A memory surfaced from nowhere, Callan cooking eggs in her old kitchen, humming an off-key jazz tune barefoot. The moment was nothing, but it was also everything, because that version of him had existed too, not just the man who broke her, but the one who once tried, before power made him blind. That afternoon, she visited her father. He was on the porch, trimming a plant that didn't need trimming. You're fidgeting, she said, as she walked up. I'm retired, he replied. This is legal fidgeting. Zuri smiled and sat beside him. They watched the street in silence for a while. He passed her a glass of lemonade. She took a sip and said, It's sweet. He shrugged. Life's bitter enough. She gave him a look. He didn't apologize. After a few minutes, he said, "You did well." She knew what he meant. Not just the foundation, the visit, the letting go. She nodded. "I know. You look settled," he added. "I am." He watched her, then said, "That man left you something else." Zuri turned slowly. "What do you mean?" Raymond reached under the chair and pulled out an envelope. Plain, sealed, her name written in Callan's handwriting. "I got it last week. Held it. Didn't know if I'd give it to you." Zuri took it without hesitation. She didn't flinch. She didn't ask why he waited. She just held it in her lap, thumb pressing lightly along the seal. She didn't open it right away. Not there. They finished the lemonade, talked about the neighbors, watched a child ride a scooter past the house 3 times before finally falling and laughing. Then she said goodbye and walked home. That night, with the windows open and the sky turning the color of silver, Zuri opened the envelope. The letter was handwritten, just a single page, no date. "Zuri, I asked your father not to give you this unless he thought it wouldn't hurt you. If you're reading it, I trust he was right. I don't have much to say anymore. I've said a lot of wrong things, and only a few right ones. But there's one truth I never gave you when it mattered most. I saw you, even when I acted like I didn't. Even when I let others look through you, so I wouldn't have to admit I didn't feel worthy. You were never small. I was just never big enough to stand beside you without shrinking you down. And you still stayed kind, even in your silence. I didn't write this hoping for a legacy. I wrote this because if I only get one thing right on my way out, let it be this. Thank you for walking away when I didn't deserve to be held. Thank you for not turning hard. And thank you for becoming the kind of woman I couldn't reach, but never stopped admiring. Callan." Zuri folded the letter once, then again, then placed it beside the first one, not in a drawer, not hidden, just on the table, for a moment, to rest. It had been almost a year, a full cycle of seasons, a dozen shifts in air and light, enough time for grief to settle where it no longer ached, just echoed. Zuri stood barefoot in her backyard. Early spring had crept in softly this year. The peach trees behind her new house had started blooming too soon. She didn't mind. "Don't cut those," she called over her shoulder. A man's voice replied, "I'm pruning, not cutting." "There's a difference." She turned. He stood a few feet away, holding a pair of garden clippers like they were surgical tools. His name was Ellis. Tall, quiet, soft-spoken in crowds, sure-handed in solitude. He worked in restoration, homes, furniture, whatever carried memory in its bones. They'd met when she bought the small craftsman house 6 months earlier. He was hired to help restore the porch railing, stayed for the deck, then the sunroom, then the occasional breakfast, then every Sunday. Now, he stayed for her, and never once asked her to rush. Zuri pulled her cardigan tighter and walked toward the tree line. Ellis glanced at her, reading her without asking. "You've been quiet this morning," he said gently. "I was remembering." He waited. She added, "Callan, it's been 1 year." Ellis nodded slowly. Not jealous, not threatened, just listening. Zuri continued, "I used to wonder if I should have gone back, said goodbye. You didn't need to, I know. But still." He set the clippers down. "Want to take a drive?" She looked up. "Where?" "Wherever the silence wants." Zuri smiled. It wasn't love in fireworks. It was something else, like sunlight through old glass. Warm, not blinding. Consistent, not loud. They drove with the windows down. Zuri leaned her head against the seat, letting the wind thread through her braids. They passed the turnoff to her old neighborhood. She didn't flinch, didn't feel curious either. She was someone else now, someone who no longer needed the skyline to feel valid. They ended up at a farmer's market outside the city. Ellis bought lavender honey. Zuri picked up fresh basil and soft bread. They shared a lemonade. She held it with both hands. He reached for her wrist and pressed a thumb gently into her pulse. A habit of his, wordless, rooted, Zuri let it happen. When they got home, she sat on the back steps while Ellis fixed a loose screen door. She opened her journal. Not to write heavy thoughts, just to list what I have now: a home that breathes, a man who doesn't interrupt my quiet, mornings that don't ache, my father, alive, with less salt in his lemonade, nights I fall asleep without watching the door, a garden that grows without asking why. She paused, then added, a letter I don't need to reread to remember who I am. Ellis came and sat beside her. You ever gonna let me cook you dinner? She looked over. Maybe. Next week. Maybe. Next year. Don't push it, she teased. He chuckled and handed her a spoon of the lavender honey. She tasted it, closed her eyes. When she opened them, he was still there, still waiting, still gentle. Flashback, 10 months ago. After Callan passed, she received a final legal notice. He left nothing to her. She expected that, but he'd transferred his shares in the old Savannah house to her father, as if to return something to the man who never bowed. Zuri never visited the house. She didn't need bricks to remember, or furniture to forgive. Instead, she used part of her inheritance from her mother's side to start a quiet retreat program for women rebuilding from emotional abandonment. Not a center, not a non-profit with press releases, just real rooms, real care, no cameras, no names required. She named it Kairos, Greek for the right time, present day. That night, Ellis cooked after all. She let him. He made roasted salmon, wild rice, and sautéed kale. He didn't try to impress her. He just cared if she ate enough. They ate on the back patio. No music, just the soft hum of cicadas starting early. After dinner, he stood behind her, arms wrapped loosely around her waist. Zuri leaned back. He kissed the crown of her head, held it there. She said nothing. He didn't need her to. The stars came out. Zuri looked up and whispered, I used to think pain was proof I'd lived. Ellis didn't reply right away. Then he said, maybe peace is proof you chose to stay. She turned slowly, met his eyes, kissed him, soft, real, no ghosts between them. Zuri was folding laundry on a quiet Saturday morning when her phone buzzed. She almost didn't check it, but the name made her pause. Lana Rhodes, Callan's younger sister, the one who once looked at her like she didn't belong in silk, the one who never returned a single call after the divorce. Zuri debated for a long second, then answered, Hello? Lana's voice came through tight, controlled, but there was no venom. Zuri, hi, I hope I'm not intruding. Zuri said nothing. She didn't have to. Lana filled the silence. I found a box, one of Callan's, from the apartment in Boston. I wasn't going to say anything, but I think you should see what's inside. Zuri didn't move. I can send it to you, Lana added quickly. Or email, or not. I'm sorry, this is probably strange. Zuri finally spoke. I'll text you my address. She hung up, hands still. She didn't feel dread. She didn't feel afraid, just curious, but with boundaries now. 3 days later, the package came. A small brown box, light. She opened it slowly. Inside were only 3 things. 1, a folded letter with her name. 2, a plane ticket from the week they separated. 3, a sketch of her. It stopped her. The sketch wasn't done by a professional. It was Callan's hand, shaky in parts, but he'd drawn her, sitting on the porch in Savannah, feet tucked under her, holding a cup of tea. She stared at it for a long time. It wasn't grand, but it was honest, something he never gave her in words. The letter was dated 4 months before he died. Zuri, you won't believe this is from me. That's fair. I failed you. Not once, but constantly. Every day, I let silence be the language between us, and I mistook control for care. You didn't walk away from me. I pushed you, 1 inch at a time. The truth is, I bought that return ticket the day after you left. I sat with it in my hand for days. I never got on the flight. I told myself I was letting you go, but I was just being a coward. I saw a photo of you once, months later. You were laughing with your dad. You looked alive. I don't know if I ever gave you that. I'm not asking for forgiveness. But I wanted to say, I saw you, even when I acted like I didn't, and I'm sorry it took me this long to admit it. Callan. Zuri folded the letter quietly. She didn't cry. She didn't want to. Instead, she walked out to the backyard, barefoot again. Ellis was under the porch, painting the final layer on a wooden bench he'd built for her garden. She sat down in the grass. He looked up. She held out the sketch. He took it, examined it for a long moment, then handed it back. That him? She nodded. Ellis tilted his head. Want to talk about it? No. He didn't push. That night, they sat under the stars again. She said quietly, he saw me. In the end, Ellis nodded once. I'm glad you have that. She turned to him. But you knew me. Ellis brushed a thumb along her jaw. You let me. Weeks passed. Zuri framed the sketch, but not as a memorial. She placed it in the guest room, a corner of memory, not the center. She continued running Kairos. Women came from across the state. Some stayed 3 days, some 3 months. All left lighter. Zuri didn't tell them her story. She didn't need to. They felt it. Peace leaves a scent behind when you've earned it. One morning, Ellis returned from a trip. He had gone to retrieve reclaimed wood from an old barn. Zuri met him at the door, coffee in one hand. You're quiet, he said. I was thinking about what it would be like to have someone here full-time. He froze for a second, not in fear, but in disbelief. She added, not asking, just wondering. Ellis set the coffee down, stepped close, and looked at her with calm certainty. I'm not going anywhere. That night, as they lay together, her head on his chest, his fingers gently tracing along her spine, Zuri whispered, this feels safe. Ellis kissed her forehead and replied, that's because it is. 6 months later, the front porch was done. Ellis installed a swing. Zuri planted yellow roses around the gate. Kairos opened a second home 2 counties over. Her father came by on Sundays. He brought peach pie. He still didn't like sweet tea. And sometimes, when the breeze was soft, Zuri would sit alone on the porch and reread her list. What I have now. A man who protects peace, not disturbs it. A love that doesn't raise its voice. An ex who said sorry too late, but still said it. A past that doesn't own me. A home that breathes joy. A life not built from someone's riches, but from my own. And one night, as they sat quietly after dinner, Ellis pulled out a ring. Simple, silver, real, no kneeling, just him saying, only if you still want me here next year. Zuri smiled, took his hand, and whispered, stay as long as peace does. If this story made you pause, reflect, or feel something real, tap the like button. Share it with someone who understands quiet strength. Comment below with what part of Zuri's journey spoke to you most. And subscribe to Mr. Charles' Stories, where dignity, love, and second chances come to life. Because sometimes the softest endings hold the loudest truths.